Turkey. When it comes to the Turkish army, sources trace the army's foundation back to the Modu Chanyu of the Xiongnu Empire in 209 BC. But of course, modern history of the army began after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Now, numbers as recent as 2015 report that the Turkish army, along with the rest of the entire Turkish military, have seen a huge growth in their personnel strength, and these numbers are comparable to their strength back in the 2000s. A big contributing factor for this type of growth is the destabilization of Syria as well as Iraq. Now, the Turkish army's motto is peace at home, peace in the world. Turkey's total combat tanks are 3,200, and they have a total of 9,500 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery sit at a total of 1,120, and they have 1,272 towed artillery and 350 rocket projectors. The next nation's army I'm looking at is the nation of Pakistan. So the Pakistan army is a volunteer service, and their primary objective, as well as its constitutional mission, is to really just make sure that the national security and the national unity of Pakistan is really kept in check. It conducts a lot of humanitarian rescue operations at home, as well as participates in a lot of peacekeeping missions which are mandated by the United Nations overseas. Now, the two main branches of the army are the combat arms and the administrative services. All of them consist of several different branches that include army officers, junior commissioned officers, as well as other enlisted personnel. Their motto is a follower of none but Allah, the fear of Allah, strive for Allah. Pakistan's army has 2,200 combat tanks, 3,665 armored fighting vehicles, 429 self-propelled artillery. Their towed artillery count is 1,226, and they have 150 rocket projectors in their possession. The next nation to look at is Egypt. So the Egyptian army is the largest service branch within the Egyptian armed forces. The Egyptian armed forces chief of staff's office is in Cairo, and he's the chief of staff of the entire army. There's 3 command and control headquarters and 9 command and control field headquarters, and they're directed from the chief of staff's office. The most notable engagements of the Egyptian army, these all happened in the 20th century, and they were Egypt's 5 wars with Israel in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1967 to 1970, and also in 1973. The motto of the Egyptian army is, "We painted the face of our nation on our hearts." They have a total of 2,160 combat tanks. Their armored fighting vehicles sit at a total of 5,735. Their self-propelled artillery count is 1,000 even. Their towed artillery, however, is 2,189, and they have 1,100 rocket projectors. Next up, we have Indonesia. So the Indonesian army is composed of a headquarters as well as 15 military region commands and a strategic reserve command called Kostrad, which is a special forces command, as well as a special forces command Kopassus, and several other units. There are today 5 types of infantry battalions in the Indonesian army, and those are the Power Raider Infantry Battalion, the Mechanized Raider Infantry Battalion, the Raider Infantry Battalion, the Mechanized Infantry Battalion, and the Infantry Battalion. Their motto is unmatchable bird with noble goals. Their combat tanks sit at a total of 315. Their armored fighting vehicles total 1,300. Now their self-propelled artillery are at 141, their towed artillery 356, and they have 36 rocket projectors. The army of the country of Iran is up next. Now the Iranian army is also known as the Artesh. Now Artesh has its own joint staff, which coordinates its 4 separate service branches, which are the ground forces, the air forces, the navy, and the air defense forces. Their headquarters are in Tehran, Iran, and the Iranian army has fought 2 major invasions in modern era. The first one was back in 1941, and this invasion was by the Soviet and the British forces during the time of World War II. The second was in 1980, and that was the Iraqi invasion, which lasted almost 8 years. Their motto is, "And our soldiers soldiers, they verily would be the victors. Getting down to the specifics, when we look at their combat tanks, they have 1,634, they have 2,345 armored fighting vehicles, 570 self-propelled artillery, 2,128 towed artillery, and 1,900 rocket projectors. Yeah, they're packing a lot when it comes to the rockets. So we're about halfway in this episode, and I think it's just a great time to let you know about our military playlist as well as our playlist about Islam, because this is what this video is about. So I have a link to a playlist of videos just about the military, the Army, Navy, Special Forces, all of that. You'll find a lot about the different countries around our world and see how they run their military and learn about their military power and how they're set up. Then the next playlist is videos just dedicated to the religion of Islam. You'll learn a lot more about the history, a lot more about the beliefs and the differentiations between the different branches of Islam, why the branches of Islam exist, things like that. So I highly recommend that playlist as well. So I'll have two links below in the video description. I'll also link to them in the card section of this episode. And for those of you who don't want to click away from this episode just yet, which I don't recommend doing, finish this one first, I'll have the playlist linked to the end of the episode at the end screen. Okay, moving on to the next country is Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi Arabian Army is the largest branch of the Saudi Arabian Armed Forces. Now, I didn't really find a motto for the Saudi Arabian Army, but I did find a motto for Saudi Arabia as a country, and it is, "There is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God." The Saudi Army has been active since 1745, and that was when it was an independent service arm. But of course, it's now been an official branch of the armed forces since 1902. And in the year 2000, the Saudi Arabian government, they spent billions of dollars to expand Saudi's forces, including their army, of course. But unfortunately, there's a lot of modern equipment that they had to learn and really introduce into their army. And a lot of the equipment is still not properly understood or even used to this day. Nevertheless, the Saudis have a very powerful army. They have 1,062 combat tanks, 11,100 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery totals 705. Their towed artillery is at 1,818, and their rocket projectors sit at 122. The next country in this list is Algeria. So the Algerian army includes 2 armored and 3 mechanized divisions. Land Forces Command is really responsible for organizing and preparing the land forces so as to ensure the defense of the national land space in cooperation with the other forces in Algeria. Now, the organization of Algeria's land forces is made up of a central command, military and operational sectors, big units, and autonomous units, as well as you'll find training institutions. Now, a lot of their equipment was provided by Russia and various other countries. And the motto for Algeria as a nation is "By the people and for the people." Their combat tanks sit at a total of 2,475. They have 6,900 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery total at 400. Their towed artillery is at 583, and they have 367 rocket projectors. And then Malaysia is our next nation. So the King of Malaysia is the supreme commander of the Malaysian Armed Forces, and the Malaysian Army currently has 17 corps or regiments. Now, these are grouped into 3 main components: the combat element, then there is the combat support element, and then the support element. So the corps and regiments are currently organized into 5 divisions. The first military units in Malaysia can be traced all the way back to March 1861. And then fast forward a bunch of years, the modern Malaysian Army came into existence in January 1933. And their motto is "Strong and Loyal." The Malaysian Army has 74 combat tanks in their possession. They have a total of 1,460 armored fighting vehicles. Their self-propelled artillery sit at 29, and their towed artillery total 211, and they have 54 rocket projectors in their possession. So now, coming down to the end of this list, we have Syria. The Syrian army makes up approximately 80% of the combined services. It officially came into existence in 1945 before Syria obtained full independence the following year. And what we know about the Syrian armed forces is that they have really been involved in suppressing a lot of the political movements within Syria. Their motto is "Guardians of the homeland, they have 5,035 combat tanks, 5,170 armored fighting vehicles, 500 self-propelled artillery, their towed artillery total at 2,210, and they have 700 rocket projectors. Starting at number 10, we have the nation of Morocco. Morocco has a total active personnel of 310,000 with a defense budget of $10 billion. Morocco has one of the largest armed forces in the region, again with 310 active personnel. However, it has one of the lowest defense budgets at just $10 billion. And by the way, the defense budgets will be listed in US dollars. But despite that, it has a military power index score of 0.8408. Now, the country's forces has gained useful experience as a result of the political instability in its neighborhood. In particular, the disputed territory of the Western Sahara to the south, as well as further but limited experience in other areas, including being a part of the Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen. Now, greater investment in its military forces is expected to continue in the years to come, and they're helped a lot by their support that they get from Saudi Arabia. Moving on to number 9, we have the nation of Syria. They have a total active personnel of 142,000, and their defense budget is $1.8 billion. So of course their defense budget is a lot lower. Now, years of fighting has left Syria's military machine very damaged but also battle hardened. Their serving members total 142,000, but they're really short of personnel, and it's leading to increased efforts at conscription, which many actually do their best to completely avoid being drafted into the army. Allied militia alongside conventional forces have played an important role in keeping the regime of Bashar al-Assad from being taken over, and their military power index rating is 0.8241. Moving on now to the nation of Iraq at number 8. Iraq has a total active personnel of 165,000, and their defense budget is $1.73 billion. Now, Iraq has a pretty low defense budget, although this is still a long way behind Saudi Arabia's spending level. Now, the country's armed forces have made significant gains in recent years in battles against enemy militants, as well as recapturing the city of Mosul back in October of 2017, and driving them out of other areas of the country since then. Now, they have been helped in the task by assistance from the United States, as well as other Western powers, as well as they've gotten military advice from Iran's Al-Quds Brigade. Their military power index rating is 0.7911. The nation of United Arab Emirates comes in at number 7. They have a total active personnel of 64,000, and their defense budget is a lot larger than these other nations previously that I just mentioned at $22.7 billion. Now, their military power index rating is 0.7034. So of course, UAE is ranked a lot higher than many of its other neighboring countries. Those nations include Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar. Now, it's said that their forces are arguably some of the most capable among the Gulf Cooperation Council states. They've really gained a lot of valuable experience in Afghanistan, Libya, and Yemen, especially in recent years. And the country's special forces also impressed a lot of people, especially after their amphibious assault to capture the Yemeni port city of Aden, and that happened in July of 2015. Next up at number 6, we have the nation of Algeria. Now, they boast an active personnel of 130,000, and their defense budget sits at $13 billion. With some of the best equipment in North Africa, much of it being sourced from Russia and also from China, Algeria's military has a score of 0.4659. The country has had to battle domestic extremists for many years, as well as faces troublesome border areas with neighbors including Libya and Mali. Not to mention playing a very important role in supporting the Western Saharan independence movement, the Polisario Front. So that said, let's move on to the last 5 nations. Starting at number 5, we have Israel. Israel has a total active personnel of 170,000, and now they have a defense budget of $20 billion US. With numerous hostile neighbors to contend with, Israel has always felt the need to ensure that its armed forces are clearly superior to anything that they may have to face in battle. Israel Defense Forces are some of the best equipped and best trained, as well as most capable of any in the region, and this is according to the IISS. Also, they're continue to be supported heavily by the United States, and the country's military power index sits at 0.3111. Saudi Arabia comes next at number 4 with a total active personnel of 478,000, and now their defense budget is $67.6 billion. billion. Yeah, that's a massive leap. They are a regional giant, at least in terms of its military budget and its size, which of course easily surpasses a lot of its other rival nations. Also, Saudi Arabia's military power index rating is 0.3034, so that's why it comes in at number 4. Now, the huge amount of money being spent in Saudi Arabia each year means that the country has some of the best equipped army forces in the entire Middle East region. Its involvement in the Yemen civil war over the past several years has given its forces valuable frontline experience, but its failure to defeat some of their opponents there also has raised questions about how effective their forces are when it comes to military action. But speaking of regional giants, we move on to number 3, Iran. Iran, they have a total active personnel of 523,000. Now, their defense budget is $19.6 billion. Iran has more active personnel than any other country in the Middle East region. Looking at their whole military together, their army, their navy, their air forces, as well as they have more men in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC. Years of international sanctions have meant it has been unable to source many weapon systems from abroad, and this forces Iran to really improvise and develop a substantial homegrown defense industry. Its armed forces are also seen as particularly strong when it comes to asymmetric warfare, and the Iranian forces, particularly the elite Al-Quds unit of the IRGC, have played a very key role in fighting in both Syria as well as Iraq, and also Iran has provided support to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Iran's military power index rating sits at 0.2191, so that puts them at the number 3 spot at the head of many other nations in the Middle East. Now moving on now to number 2, Turkey. So some people still view Turkey as the most powerful nation in the Middle East, but they were recently bumped by another nation. We'll get to them in a second. But Turkey has an active personnel of 355,000 and their defense budget is $19 billion. Also, their military index power rating is 0.2098. And Turkey's armed forces have faced a lot of up and down throughout the years, which many of its officers purged from the services following a failed coup back in July of 2016. Now, since then, the country has become ever more heavily involved in the war in neighboring Syria, and concluding in the Afrin campaign launched back in January of 2018. Now, the country also has important overseas military ties with Qatar and Somalia, basing troops in both of those countries. Not only is it seen as the largest military force in the Middle East region, but it's ranked in 11th place globally, just ahead of Germany and Italy. And then now moving on to the number 1 most powerful nation currently in the Middle East, we have Egypt. Egypt has an active personnel count of 438,500 and their defense budget is $11.2 billion. With the former general now in charge of the country, Abdel el-Sisi, it is very unsurprising that Egypt's army is in a very powerful position in the domestic political arena. The defense forces of Egypt are currently in the midst of an equipment recapitalization program with new fighter aircraft, attack helicopters, surface-to-air missiles all being brought in. However, the country has struggled to deal with the challenge posed by insurgent terror groups in the northern Sinai Peninsula for the past few years. Now, their military power index rating is 0.1872, and Egypt is seen as now having the strongest military force in the Middle East and is ranked 9th strongest in the entire world. So that's where they are right now, guys. Sorry, it is no longer Turkey, it is now Egypt. But either way, let's just jump into this episode. Starting at number 10, we have the China's People's Liberation Army. China's army has to go through a 17-step obstacle course that includes swimming, climbing, and leaping over or through objects that are set on fire. Now, even if you do it perfectly or you're in good physical condition, you know, the training is pretty intense. Like, it's gonna destroy you. Like, not exactly though, but like you're gonna feel it. So candidates, they're required to also hold their breath underwater for 1 minute. And if they even try to come up for a second to get a little bit of air, boom, nope, they're dunked right back down. You gotta stay there for a minute. Don't try to extend that minute. Moving on to number 9, we have India's National Security Guard Commandos, or the NSG. Organizations within India's armed forces, they test potential soldiers by giving them only a day's worth of food and water, and then they're left in a remote place like a jungle to survive and find their way back. Now, that's just an entry-level test for India's NSG. Some are so determined to join the NSG that they actually finish with food and water left over just to impress the people that are testing them. One training method also requires candidates to get beats from local people as an endurance test. And there's another test that they have to pass where they need to pass target practice while drunk. And this is to simulate firing your weapon under unusual conditions. Now we know the Russia's Spetsnaz, they had to be in this episode. So the training and the selection process for the Spetsnaz is a long 5-year process. Now the first 5 months alone are designed to break recruits and then build them back up so they're willing to perform tactics that their superiors want them to perform. But the good thing though for Spetsnaz is that their operatives get to select their own non-commissioned officers from within their ranks, instead of letting their superiors make that choice for them during the review process. But their training tactics are kept really hush-hush. We don't know too much about them, but we just know it's really intense. Number 7, we have Australia's Special Air Service Regiment. Now there's one aspect of their training called resistance to interrogation. Now one actual operative described the experience of the training and said that a white bag was put on his head and then he was stripped and taken to a cell, and then he was put in stress positions for hours and deprived of sleep. So if he even started to doze off or even looked like he was even thinking about dozing off slightly, he was slapped back to remain awake for 3 days straight. Now the Special Air Service Regiment has not disclosed all of their training methods, but apparently more people have lost their lives training to join them than actual recruits that were sent on real operations. US Navy SEALs is up next at number 6. So perhaps the most popular group in this episode. We see the Navy SEALs everywhere, in media, in the video games, all of that. But while their 30-month average training program is only about half of what the Spetsnaz is, it condenses a lot of intensity into 1 week during the first 3 weeks called Hell Week.
After that, the plebes head to their dorm at Bancroft Hall.
What's your company?
And assemble on an area known as Red Beach, tasked with teaching proper protocol to the plebes.
Now study and know the entire chain of command. Do you understand me?
These are the ones that we're going to serve with in the future, and they want them to be the best that they can possibly be.
Now on 4 hours of sleep, candidates, they have to spend 5.5 days constantly covered in mud and in the cold, performing training exercises on coastal environments, as well as paddling and doing extreme exercises and fighting just to stay awake, among other things. Now the crazy part is that their trainers yell at them to quit, and they taunt them by eating and drinking food in front of them. However, although the training is intense, there is emergency medical staff that's available all the time, just in case. At number 5, we have the Israeli Shayatet. Now over the course of 20 months, they must go through training and diving under extreme cold conditions with no visibility, power drop operations, demolitions, and more. And now those who qualify are then assigned to air, sea, and land operations based on which one they did the best in. Now, trainees are also sent out on real missions in pretty much the worst possible circumstances. The Shayatet also has medical personnel on hand at all times because the training is so intense, anything could happen. Moving on to number 4, we have the South Korean Special Warfare Command. Now this training course goes on for 10 days, and while they're there, they experience training in low temperatures because they train outside. They don't even wear shirts for their training. They have to run and do sit-ups and even wrestle each other in freezing snow. That's probably the worst thing I've ever heard of for a training exercise in this whole episode, or just in general. Now here's the thing though, everyone also needs to have a black belt in Taekwondo, but that's the easy part. These guys should have been number 1. They're training outside in the snow without shirts. The training at number 3 is UK Special Air Service. Candidates for the SAS, they're dumped in the middle of nowhere and told to cover 40 miles in 20 hours while carrying a 60-pound weight and rifle.
Hold it. Keep it there.
Go. Everything you've got, 20G. Come on, everything you've got.
Boys, there's no way of getting through.
Also, they have no food except just a bottle of water with them. Now, their uniforms and their boots are chosen to not fit them. Like, this is done purposely. Now, for those who actually complete it in the time that's required, they then have to perform a 4-mile run only in half an hour. Now, here we have the Pakistani Special Services Group, or the SSG, coming in at number 2. Now, these guys, of course, are very intense and hardcore. Pakistan puts their trainees through an endurance run on a stricter timeline than the UK does. Now, after 2 years of service in the regular Pakistani military, a service member is then eligible for SSG selection. During an 8-month training period, soldiers are required to cover 36 miles of territory in only 12 hours, and then they have to run 5 miles in 45 minutes with a full pack. Now, at the end of the 8 months, SSG candidates have to perform 7 paradrops, and 5 of them are done during the day and 2 of them are done at night. Now then, after that, they proceed to the advanced commando training. And that's where they have to spend half of a year doing commando training. And when that's complete, they get to join the SSG. But guys, we've seen some intense training, but number 1 definitely is the United Kingdom's Gurkhas. Because of their living conditions already, like the Nepalese people who apply for this British military group, they're subjected to punishing tests. And this is even before they can even think of applying. But either way, the initial tests are pretty basic. They have some running and pull-up exercises, and then comes the real testing. So recruits are required to run 5 kilometers while wearing a 25-kilogram weight, and those 5 kilometers, they come with a 400-meter rise in incline and done through a very rocky and dusty terrain, which has to be done in only 45 minutes. This is so unfair. Like, we've done videos about the Nepalese Gurkhas before, so we know that they're a very hardcore group. But what the UK puts them through, it's pretty much impossible. You pretty much failed before you even started. Nevertheless, the Nepalese are so determined that some of them definitely make it through. How? I do not know.